Welcome to Momentum Investing, property investing made easy. One of the world's top podcasts on property investing, bringing you the top experts in the field so you can learn firsthand what it takes to create passive income and take control over your financial future.
How do you get planning permission? Welcome to the Momentum Investing Podcast. My name is Daniel Wood. I am your host for this episode. And today we interview David Kemp, a planning consultant, a planning expert who guides us through every single step in the process of how to get planning. This episode was really powerful. If you watch it on YouTube, you'll see me sitting there taking notes the whole time. There was a crazy amount of information that David was sharing. It was so powerful, and I'm so happy we got him here on the show. If you're listening to this on any podcast platform, well, just know I was taking notes, so I hope you take this opportunity to get a pen and paper and take notes as well. We do an interview like this every single Thursday on the Momentum Investing Podcast. You can follow us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, any other platform, or on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe, because every week we interview a different expert to learn the details of how we can grow our portfolio. Next week's episode, we're actually interviewing Jessica Olsen-Zabel, one of the top interior designers in the United Kingdom, to learn how she plans out a project. How does she bring in the architects? How does she scale the rooms? How does she make sure that she gets the best possible rents? So every single week we interview different experts. We've had Kim Kiyosaki, Jordan Harbinger. We have celebrities. We have success stories from people who've built property portfolios. And like today and next week, we have property experts that can give you the inside scoop. So make sure you subscribe. I hope you loved this episode. I did. It was incredibly powerful. If you've ever been worried about buying a property because it doesn't have planning, well, look no further. In this episode, you get the answers. Welcome to the Momentum Investing Podcast. I'm really excited to be here today with the planning consultant, the planning expert, David Kemp. David, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. So we're super excited to have you here because a lot of the people listening to this show has done or is getting into planning projects or projects requiring planning. So I thought before we get into the details and specifics, could you introduce yourself a little bit, your background, what you do, and then we'll get into the process itself.
Yeah, sure. I'm a planning consultant, which means I basically get planning permissions for people, which adds value to the property, and we also help people through lawful use, sometimes enforcement processes as well. We deal with planning appeals, and we deal with a lot of PD, permitted development and prior approval. The business is based in London, so we're mostly southeast and London focused, but we also got projects, particularly larger projects, which are further afield, down the southwest, south coast, Midlands, north, etc. Anything from title splits and all the way up to about 200 homes we've dealt with recently as well. So it's quite a broad mix. Most of it's residential led, but we also have done some pure commercial as well.
All right, very cool. So let's get into the details and how this process works for us as an investor. So if I'm considering a project and getting into a project that doesn't have planning and that I want to do something that requires planning, what's the kind of the first step for me to do? What do I do before I go out and buy that property and cross my fingers?
Well, you've got to do your market research. I think that's the most important thing, not just for your own GDV, just not only for your own figures, but also if you know where the demand is, not only for the product that you want to move into if it's residential, as well as you've got some good solid market background and information about the weakness of the demand of the property that you're moving from. That can help from a planning point of view. So for instance, if you haven't got permitted development rights and you want to move from, say, commercial or some community uses, then you sometimes need to be able to show that there's no demand for that particular use. So it has a dual use, having that sort of that background, that market information, I think the second thing is also checking the title, obviously, restrictive covenants, notices, cautions, and all those sorts of things as well, checking them on the title, making sure that you know what you're buying, basically.
Right.
And then you've got a number of building and environmental and planning things around that as well. So if you are looking at changes of use, then you might want to check whether or not there are any Article 4 directions that are in the area that have withdrawn permitted development rights.
Right.
And also, if you're looking to build on the wider plot that you're looking at, then you'll look at environmental constraints, whether or not it's contaminated land, it might be trees, it might be access. You want to work out what your developable area is, how far you may have to be away from certain other buildings, neighboring buildings, and that sort of thing as well. So the four main things are sort of planning, and then building and environmental risk, market, and also the restrictive covenants and the title.
Right. Okay. So if I've done those checks and I now see, okay, I believe I can get planning on this project, and I'm still super excited. You know, it hasn't turned me off yet.
Mm-hmm.
What's the next step in that process? What do I do now?
Well, if you've got an idea as to the fact that you know you can secure it, and you've got an idea as to what you need to be able to achieve on site in order to make the price that you're being asked to pay work, then you should then have an idea as to how many units roughly you need.
Yeah.
And that's when you start to come to somebody like me, or you might come to an architect first if you're not sure about the number of units, right, and work out whether or not you can actually get them on site first. But either way, you don't necessarily have to speak to an architect to do the space feasibility first.
Right.
You could come to me first, but then at some point you're going to have to speak to an architect and get some drawings done, some sketches done. Right. But then you can come to me, and when you do come to me, we'll look at it in terms of very high levels. Are there any big red flags that basically say it's a no-no? Article 4 directions, even if there's no PD, there might be the possibility of development, but are there listed buildings, are there conservation areas? Is it in a flood zone? And those sorts of things as well. So we'll take some high-level checks and sense checks. It won't be, the way that we work is that we don't tend to go into deep on the numbers at that very, very high level stage. We're just dealing with the principles of development and change of use. And then further on, what we'll look into is probably how many units you might be able to get on site. And if you've got the sketches from an architect, that helps as well. So that's kind of the next stage. And then that naturally leads on to getting some sketches done, some floor plans, whereby you can work out roughly what you might be able to get on site.
Right.
Which is very useful because you then not only can use that as a basis for costing up,
yeah,
and speaking to your builder about what's involved, but also take it to local agents, and they can have a look at the number of units, the size of the units. They can give you an idea as to what your possible prices might be for those units, which ones might sell the quickest, and then you can work out a cash flow, and you can work out some GDVs on that and start to sharpen up your numbers.
Perfect. Very, very good. All right. So now that I feel confident, my GDV is there, I've got like the paperwork ready. Mm-hmm. Is my next step to go out and buy the property, or is there anything else I need to do before I get to that point?
Yeah, you want to try and secure the deal. I mean, in most cases, what we're trying, where I'm working with SME developers, is that there's usually some degree of fallback to it, in that there's a baseline in planning, which is fairly secure. It's not the most that you can get on site, but it provides sort of a comfortable backstop. So this is called like permitted development or prior approval. It might be that there's no permitted development or prior approval, but your backstop is a planning permission that might still be live, that you might still have the benefit of being able to, implement. And usually, if there is a permitted development play, the client will usually go out, secure it by way of an exchange. Once they've done the exchange, then they will, before the exchange, we'll usually start looking at the applications necessary for permitted development and prior approval. But it won't be until the exchange takes place that we then submit the PD or the prior approval.
Right.
Okay. And then once that goes in, if that takes maybe about 2 months, then there might be a delayed completion so that you can get the permitted development and prior approval over the line and then have a revaluation, and therefore you can get a higher nominal loan, because you're, for instance, if you're getting a loan of say 65% of GDV, then if you've increased the GDV by the PD prior approval route in the meantime between exchange and completion, and by the time you get to completion, you can go back to the bank and ask for more money. And it might be that you might not need a bridge, or you might only need a very little bit of equity to be able to complete the purchase.
Right. Makes sense. Makes perfect sense. All right. So now I go and buy my deal. And well, what happens now? Now we actually have to secure the planning. So what do I do now?
That's when we start going in with applications for either permitted development or prior approval. And we might then also go in for applications to improve the property elsewhere. And there might be pre-applications for that. And then it might be a further planning application after that as well. And those processes have different routes, and there are different things involved with them.
Right. Okay. Very cool. Very cool. And so what are important kind of points that you think we should keep in mind when we're going through that process to let's say, increase our odds of being successful?
During the planning stage or before you submit the planning?
Well, I would say in both, actually, because we want to succeed in both steps, right?
Yeah, but what I mean is, in terms of when you're searching for the property, in terms of increasing your odds of being successful.
Right. Well, let's start with if I've found a property that I've fallen in love with and I want to get over the line.
Okay. All right. I think one of the key things is to have a good team around you. And to have an architect and a planning consultant certainly is your core team. But also, I think that experience has taught me that having a good highways consultant that you can reach out to is also very valuable as well, because a good highways consultant, if they can drive down the ratio of the number of cars needed to service the site, or they can find a way of accessing a site which might be a little bit landlocked, might be quite complicated, then it opens up value. So, I mean, there's often, because of the nature of what they do and the advice that they're giving, it can often help to unlock value. So they're good as well. We often use a very, very tight-knit circle of maybe only 2 or 3 regular highways consultants. And the reason we do that is because when it comes to due diligence for the client, we can reach out to those consultants who we already have a relationship with and say, could you give us some initial very high level advice on these points? And because we're regularly giving them work, then we've got that relationship, so they feel comfortable in doing so. And again, it just helps to sharpen the client's pencils on things and also narrow down risk. So having a good team around you, I think, is the most important thing. And then going on from there, I would say, as a planning consultant, we have to do our due diligence. We have to check a lot of things around the planning history, and it's an iterative process. It's a bit backwards and forwards sometimes between us and the client in terms of trying to soak up as much information as we possibly can. And you won't have all the information that you will probably want, but you'll probably have most of the information that you'll most likely need for an application. And having the right strategy, working that out in a way that makes sense for the deal and the risks, and being clear on timescales. I mean, I work with different types of SME clients and different types of jobs. But it's remarkable how many SME clients, they don't do either very much due diligence before they go in for the deal. They get seduced by the idea of just doing the deal for the deal's sake.
Right.
And that's very risky, as I'm sure you appreciate. Things can unravel very quickly. But also, I think that a lot of people don't work out clearly what their program is, what their timescales are. And we as consultants need that, because the last thing we want is to be getting a call on a Friday afternoon saying, has the application gone in? It's got to be on by Monday, when actually everybody is being told that, or you got the impression that there was no particular rush.
Right.
And to have that, because we've got resources, we've got timescales, we've got other clients and other jobs to handle as well. So, often with a client, they are dealing with multivarious things, probably about 10, 20, 30 things in one job.
Yeah.
But they might, a few of them might be dealing with 2 other or 3 other jobs that they're dealing with side by side. But usually it's not so many jobs, but it's a lot of things to deal with under that job.
Yeah.
So you're very, very focused on one particular thing, whereas, a lot of us architects, highways consultants, planning consultants, we've got to manage various different things. And it just helps not only with team harmony, but also with stress management for the client as well, to feel as if everybody knows what the program is. So basically, you've got to work out what your deal end point is, and then you try and work back from that to see whether or not, given what the various planning steps are, what that looks like, how that works out in the program.
Right.
And it's something we encourage quite a lot of, because we often get clients who come to us and say, well, we've got to get 20, 30 units on this site. We've got to get planning for it within about 3 months,
right.
Which it's a little bit unrealistic, because with a lot of major applications, particularly these days, we've got to do quite a lot of consultation backwards and forwards, not just with the council, but also with third parties as well. And it can take many, many months. And then also you've got Section 106s which are planning agreements. You've got to agree those with the council sometimes. There's toing and froing on design, so on and so forth. So you've got to have that resilience built in. And if the vendor is pushing, if the deadlines are coming from a vendor-led pressure, then it just helps the client to go back to the vendor and manage their expectations and say, yes, I know you want to complete within that time frame. We will do our best, but I've spoken to our professional team.
Yeah.
And it's likely that now, if you're saying that 3 months in advance rather than on the eve of the deal, that the deal's got to be completed, it's just a lot more credible. Yeah. And to a certain extent, us as consultants help you as clients to take everyone who's involved in the deal, not just on our side, but also through the client, the vendor and their team on the other side, to take them through the journey of the deal. Yeah. A lot of people start off when they're selling sites with, they want to get the most that they can within as short a time period as they can. And by us working with a client in terms of managing expectations of what they'll get planning for, it then helps to the client to, as time goes through, as we go month by month, and then keeping in touch with the vendor, helps to manage their expectations about what's likely to be achieved, and so on and so forth. Because if we're pushing as hard as we can and we can't get it, it's unlikely that if they then drop the deal and they try and go out to the market, it's unlikely they'll probably be able to get better elsewhere anyway. Right. And also, if it's done over a period of time, there's a certain degree of deal inertia, which helps to keep the vendor in the deal during that time as well. So it's a process, it's a program, and we have to work on it step by step, but it really does help having that overarching program that we can all take everybody through the journey on and manage and break it down into this has got to be done by that time, that's got to be done by that time. David, what do you need from the architect, from the highways consultant, and when do you need it by, so on and so forth.
Right.
I mean, we often have development team project meetings, maybe fortnightly on some of our bigger projects as well.
Right.
Everyone gets together on a Zoom. At the moment, it's a Zoom. At some point, it'll be in a pub somewhere.
One day when we're back.
Please God, yeah.
Yeah, I know that feeling. I definitely know that feeling.
But that will make sense to you, because from a client's perspective, I guess that's, I mean, I'm trying to look at it through your eyes as the client, and the planning consultant helping the client to achieve what they want.
Right. No, I love it. So essentially, do your homework before you do the deal, go through all that process, involve a company like yourselves as quickly as possible to get that advice. And then throughout, make sure you set the long-term strategy already from the beginning and communicate that out
Exactly.
So that the process can go through.
Exactly.
Very good. Is there any other choice tidbits that you'd like to share with us? Things that maybe most investors miss, and it would be awesome if we didn't.
I think that there's a lot of important things that you've got to look out for when you're doing development. For instance, if you're doing larger development and you're looking for affordable housing that you might have to contribute to, for instance, you're doing a development which is maybe over 10 or maybe about 20 units, and you have to negotiate with the council on affordable housing, then it's good to have a section one. It's good to have a viability consultant on board very, very early,
right.
So that they can work with you to advise on GDVs, on how to pitch it, and the strategy around what you do in planning in order to help to mitigate and minimize your affordable housing payments as much as you possibly can.
Right.
But I think that from an overarching point of view, in terms of price tidbits, I think that I'm asked a lot of the time, what consultants do I need on board, and quite early. And I've mentioned 3 already. So me, the architect, and the highways consultant. I would say another consultant is certainly a daylight and sunlight consultant, not necessarily on all schemes, not quite so much as maybe a planning consultant or a highways consultant, but particularly if, for instance, you're going to need to make an application for permitted development or prior approval. A lot of those get failed on daylight and sunlight. And it's very easy to technically get right as well, because it's done by a particular formula. It's a bit more scientific in the way it's approached.
Right.
So if it's correct, it's much harder to argue with. It's less wool, it's
because
less subjective.
It is what it is.
Exactly. Yeah. But also on larger schemes, I would say engaging quite early with local residents and local residents associations. It makes a massive difference, because those people are going to make representations in any event, whether or not you like it or not.
Yeah.
And a lot of them make objections, because they just feel disenfranchised by a system that's arm's length to them, and they feel as if they've been cut out. Therefore, by bringing them in, a bit like the vendor example I gave, bringing them on that journey, you help to blunt some of their objections. And councillors, local councillors in particular, really do like being given advance notice, being given an opportunity to come down, meet on site, being given a walk through what the scheme will entail, etc., and how you're looking to enhance the area and benefit the area. And then they might have connections themselves, either onto the planning officer. They might write later on and say, we met with such and such, we don't have any objections to the scheme, actually it's good for the area, so on and so forth. But also they might give you a way in, so you've got a soft introduction into residents associations and particular community groups as well. So that facilitates it. You get those people on board, and sometimes you can shave a good, at least 1 or 2 months off the planning decision and save having to go to committee. We've had these where they've gone under delegated powers for developments of maybe 30 units. So they've just been decided by the officers, whereas being pushed onto planning committee, not only the risk of the additional cost and risk of the time, but also the risk that you might end up getting a refusal and going onto an appeal, which then costs you another year and more fees, etc. So
which we have been through,
which we is time.
Had we had those local organizations on our side instead of complaining, that would have changed the entire game on that project.
Yeah. Well, although in that case, I think they probably would have complained in any event.
They're not easy people to work with, but
they were a tough gig, Dan, I think. Yeah.
but that's the thing. It's as you say, if you can convince them, and the earlier you can get them on your side, then it becomes their development.
Absolutely. And then smaller projects, well, in terms of tidbits, a lot of your planning, if you're working with the right planning consultant and you're doing what I've said before, they take those 4 steps of the marketing, the title, the building and environmental and flood risk and trees due diligence and the planning due diligence, then you can't go far wrong. You're speaking to your planner early enough, they'll check things like Article 4 directions and stuff like that. So a lot of it's about avoiding bear traps early on, as well as looking for the opportunity. What they say is the golden rule of investments, and I'm sure Warren Buffett's golden rule is don't lose money.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the second rule is don't forget the first rule. From that point of view, if you do that, it's key. That's absolutely key. But I think it's very, very important to go through those steps methodically, because although planning is about process, that process, if you go through it in the right order, it helps to avoid mistakes down the line as well. But it also helps to give you confidence that there are opportunities out there which other people are going to walk away from. So, for instance, changes of use in flood zones 2 and 3, we've got them through because we've done some initial due diligence. We've looked at the flood zone maps, and they've come up in a particular way that it's shown that there's a certain opportunity there for just a change of use. So you can get them. Working with a highways consultant early, driving down the number of parking spaces that you need on site means that you can push up the number of units that you'll be able to get on site, which means that your bid can be stronger as well. So all those sorts of things.
Cool. Well, I know we want to keep digging into this, but sadly we're out of time. How do we connect with you? I know you guys post articles sharing your knowledge as well. How do we find more from you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn under David Kemp. My mugshot.
Add a link to that, guys, so you find that link in the show notes.
Yeah, my mugshot will show up there. But also, if you want to email me, I'm at david@drkplanning.co.uk. That's david@drkplanning.co.uk. We are currently revamping our website, and actually on there's going to be a whole load of resources as well, articles that I publish. I'm often write for Property Investors News every month, so my articles will be on the website as well. Links to all the videos I've done, podcasts that we've done as well, everything on there, as well as a bit more about the kind of work that we do and who we have working in the practice as well. So that's being revamped, but it should be ready in about within the next few weeks, as well as case studies and examples of all the sorts of projects that we've done before as well. So that's www.drkplanning.co.uk.
Perfect. And I'll add both of the links and the email in the show notes so you can grab them. David, thank you so much for joining us.
It's been
Appreciate
a
you taking the time, and I'll speak to you again soon.
Cheers. All the best. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you got value. I know I did. I took so much out of this episode, and I hope you're looking forward to the next episode, because if you go through this, if you buy a property that needs planning, you have a huge potential upside there. Obviously, always do your due diligence, make sure the deal actually is good, but that extra value increases your return. Next week, we're going through the next phase. We're going to look with Jessica Olsen-Zabel, one of the top interior designers in the United Kingdom, at how you then get the best possible valuation and the best possible rent. So we'll follow a project along from her perspective now. How do you bring in the architects? What is their role? When do you bring in the interior designer? How do you work with color schemes? How do you work with the builders to make sure you get the best possible results? This is a really, really exciting episode that is coming. So make sure you subscribe, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or on YouTube. And I want to thank you all who have watched this on YouTube, because we just hit 1,500 subscribers on YouTube. That's a huge milestone for us. So thank you so much for being a part of that community and connecting with us. Please make sure to comment below, and I'll see you next week when we interview Jessica Olsen-Zabel.